So I've had a couple of people write to me and ask me to talk about the Will Smith situation, which I'm happy to do because it's interesting. And, if you've watched my channel before, you know that I like to take a look at things from a bit of a different angle than most people, just because I'm interested in some philosophy and psychology and theology and stuff like that. So I don't want to look at the aspects of this situation that everybody else is looking at. I've seen some great videos that people have done. And so there's definitely some interesting stuff being said out there on YouTube and Twitter and everything. But I want to look at a couple of things that jump out to me about this situation in a kind of a deeper sense. Denzel Washington apparently said to Will Smith after this incident occurred, and then they went to like a commercial break, right? And apparently, Denzel Washington went to console and counsel Will Smith in the interim period. And Will Smith says that Denzel said to him, the devil always comes for you when you're at your highest moment. When you're at your best moment. I can't remember the quote. And that is a very interesting statement, and I like that idea. I like that sentiment, except I don't view it in terms of the devil. What I think this situation actually provides is a really sort of brilliant example of what in psychoanalysis is known as the death drive, or the death instinct, or the regressive instinct. And, one of the people that I like to talk about in a number of my videos is Sigmund Freud and the psychoanalysts who came after him. And sometimes I'll get comments from people saying, oh, Freud is so outdated. Why do you talk about him? Psychology has really moved on since Freud. Well, yes and no. Freud was instrumental in laying down concepts that today about the psyche and about the mind and about human behavior and motivation. He developed concepts that we just take for granted today. So, for instance, the idea of the unconscious self, that there is an unconscious or subconscious, you can use them interchangeably, but unconscious or subconscious part of us that we are unaware of, that motivates us, that at times even gets us to engage in destructive behavior. That idea of the unconscious, that was a Freudian invention. It's not like before then people had no idea, that there might be a deeper self or an irrational self even. But Freud was the one who really originated this theory and popularized this theory that we just take for granted today, right? The idea of a split self, or that you can have different parts of your psyche that are in conflict with each other, and then an unconscious and a conscious self. Now I'm going to get to Will Smith in a minute. I know some of you are like, hey, I didn't realize I was getting into a philosophy video or psychology video here. When are you going to get to the point? But hang on, you're going to like this. You're going to find it interesting at least. And Freud also was really instrumental in new attention being paid, or a deeper attention being paid, to the idea that one's childhood experiences, one's upbringing, was basically the foundation for later development. In other words, we just take for granted now the idea that what you experience in childhood programs you for who you are later in life in a lot of ways. And people look back, and we look to our childhood as the root of a lot of our traumas and our problems, but also as for the roots of who we are, positive and negative. Well, that's a Freudian idea, right? Yeah, it's not like before Freud, people didn't have some concept of childhood being important, right? People understood that, for instance, if you beat the shit out of someone when they're young, they'll probably grow up to be an aggressive adult, all right? I mean, yeah, some of this is common sense, but Freud was the one to really, once again, to really focus methodically and scientifically on this idea of human development, and the idea that the experiences that we go through as children are very determinative of who we are, and even unconsciously so. And there's other ideas that Freud came up with, all right? So my point being that when people tell me that Freud's not relevant, I'm like, well, you probably have a number of beliefs, fundamental beliefs about the psyche that are Freudian, and you're just not even really thinking about that. Yeah, of course, Freud had some crackpot theories too. He was a pioneer, right? No one had really done what he was doing before him, okay? Yeah, there were physicians that were working at rudimentary, like, mental hospitals, right? Basically insane asylums. But Freud invented modern psychology, and no matter how far modern psychology might stray from Freud, its roots are there. And let me just say also that a lot of people who diss Freud have not read much Freud, and he had a very, very diverse body of work, and his ideas, even the ideas that people think are nutty, they really often had a lot of truth in them. Even the Oedipal complex, right? People like to laugh about the idea, of, oh, yeah, so you want to have sex with your mom or whatever. How, what a perv, Freud was. Well, actually, I think a lot of us will agree that one's relationship with one's father or mother is often the blueprint for the type of spouse or the type of partner that one will choose later. Just look at how many people end up dating and marrying people who remind them of their parents, okay? So again, a lot of great stuff in Freud. Now, why do I say all of that? Because what I see, one of the things that I see two things that are in a very sort of Freudian psychoanalytic sense. I see two things going on with the Will Smith situation, all right? First of all, as several people have noted, Will Smith grew up in a home where he had a very conflicted, Will Smith even used the word dichotomous, dichotomous meaning two opposite things. A very conflicted dichotomous relationship with his father. Sorry. And he said that his father, and you can just go and look at the interviews. I just read a few interviews that came out at the time when his memoir came out. He wrote an autobiography, a memoir called Will, and he talks about these things. But then also when he did the press tour for it to promote the book, he talked about some of these things. So you can dig these interviews up yourself. But Will Smith said that he idolized his father. His father was amazing. And that his father laid the blueprint, his relationship with his father laid the blueprint for so many positive aspects of Will Smith and who he would become as an adult. But the dad also beat the mom. Sounds like was very abusive to Will Smith's mom. And Will Smith says that there was in particular a traumatic moment that occurred when he was a child, when he watched his father beat up his mother. And he was scared to do anything. He didn't intervene because he was too small. He was too young. I can't remember. I think he was 9. And Will Smith says in these couple of interviews that I read, he said that was the defining moment of his life. Now, when someone says that something is a defining moment in their life, that is very serious, right? Because what he's conveying there, and I'm sure he's been through some therapy that's maybe helped him to see this, but what he's conveying there is that this is a huge wound around which his personality had structured itself, right? And so what that means is that is still there under the surface, at times waiting to be activated, okay? And so, Will Smith said that was the foundational moment of his life because he felt like such a coward. He felt like such a coward that he couldn't defend his mom. And he says that feeling has stuck with him for the rest of his life, and that in a lot of ways, the characters, the confident, brave, heroic characters that he plays at times in movies are a way to get away from that interior feeling that he's just a coward. Now, I'm not saying that to defend what Will Smith did to Chris Rock or to say that that's okay. I'm really not interested in that question for this video because other people are covering that question really well, I think. But I think understanding behavior is different from justifying it, and I'm just interested right now in understanding it. So in a Freudian sense, like I said, Freud and many psychologists and therapists since then, but Freud understood that our childhood experiences were foundational. And when one experiences trauma, okay, when one experiences trauma of any kind, it creates in the mind, it creates a kind of an obstacle or a kind of, like if you get like an old record on a record player, right, or a DVD even, if you scratch the record or if you scratch the DVD, then what happens is when you try to play it, it keeps it keeps getting stuck. It keeps skipping at that point. So if you play a record that has a scratch in it, or you play a DVD that has a scratch in it, it's going to keep getting stuck. And that is very much a good metaphor for what trauma, especially trauma in childhood, does. Is it creates in the mind, and I'm speaking metaphorically, although actually biologically there's also a kind of an impression that's made in a loose sense. But what happens is that creates a kind of a skip in the psyche, a kind of a scratch in the mind, and from that point on, person throughout their life, they often find themselves in this kind of repetition compulsion, which is a Freudian and post-Freudian term, but the repetition compulsion, where we repeat, often unconsciously, we behave in ways that repeat cycles from our youth. And so I don't think, one of the things that some of us have been noticing is that when Chris Rock first told that joke, Will Smith was first laughing, and whether he was really laughing or he was most probably faking the laugh, he was laughing. And then somewhere between him laughing and then like 5 seconds later, then he's out of his chair and he goes and hits Chris Rock. That is a very brief amount of time, as my friend and fellow YouTuber Celtic Iron pointed out. It's like whiplash. Like, it's very strange how 1 second Will Smith is like smiling and laughing, and then like 5 seconds later or whatever, he's out of his seat to hit the guy, and then is cursing and pissed off and stuff. What happened in there? Well, what happened in that space, as a lot of people have pointed out, is that he looked at Jada, and Jada was apparently upset, and that set off something, right? And so, I wonder, and I've seen some other people online speculating, I wonder if what happened was, in that immediate moment, once he looked at her and he realized that this had wounded her psychologically, that then that triggered that feeling of, I can't be a coward. I'm not going to be a coward. I'm not going to be that kid in front of all of these people who's not defending his mom or who's not defending his woman, right? So I could see that. But let me tell you a different interpretation, also a kind of a psychoanalytic interpretation that I also think is interesting. And this gets at something that Denzel Washington, in fact, said to Will Smith to comfort him. Denzel Washington, in between during the commercial break, when the camera cut away, and this was after this stuff had happened, but Will Smith was probably very upset, right? Denzel Washington had a tete-a-tete with him, right? A conversation with him, briefly tried to calm him down. And one of the things apparently that Denzel Washington said is, and I'm paraphrasing, but when you're at your highest moment, that's when the devil comes for you. Now, that is a very profound idea, though not in the way perhaps that Denzel Washington and Will Smith understood it. But, I don't believe in the devil. And I don't like to think in those terms, but what I do like to think about is psychologically, psychoanalytically, is something that Freud and the post-Freudians referred to as the regressive instinct, or the death instinct, or the death drive. And the death drive is probably, if you've heard the term, that's probably how you've heard it referred to. But Freud also called it the regressive instinct. I think that's the word he used. Now, the death drive, let me put it this way. According to Freud and some of the post-Freudians, just like we have a desire in life to progress, to become better people, to be healthy, to be happy, to be well-adjusted, to be successful, to make our parents proud, whatever. We have these positive impulses, right? And in a basic sense, we have a survival instinct. But even beyond the survival instinct, we have these desires to move forward in life and to get better and to progress and to be good and all of these things. But psychoanalytically, we also have a desire, and this was the idea of Freud and some of his descendants and his proteges, and in particular, this idea actually was really the idea originally of one of Freud's students, a woman who had an affair with Carl Jung, but we'll talk about that some other time. Anyways, so here's death drive, death instinct. Basically, just like we have this desire to move forward in life, we also have, according to the psychoanalyst, we have this irrational desire to destroy ourselves and to regress, to not progress. There's a part of us that doesn't want to be happy. There's a part of us that's not consciously or usually unconsciously wants to self-sabotage. We want to trip ourselves up. And there are different, theories on why this may be. One theory being that we are just generally deeply conflicted human beings in all kinds of ways. And almost never are you going to find anything where someone feels just totally 100% about something, right? And so one idea is that in a very sort of basic sense, we have the survival or the progression instinct, but then also there's this dichotomy of the regressive instinct, right? Another theory is that some people, due to childhood traumas and problems with parenting, some people have a deeply conflicted view of themselves, or they might have a deeply conflicted view of the parent, and that expresses in a kind of a split within the self between wanting to move forward, but also wanting to destroy oneself or destroy the parent in a way by destroying oneself, if that makes any sense. I know this is deeply metaphorical, but... So for instance, Will Smith, he talks about how he uses the word dichotomy in an interview, and he said he had this dichotomy with his dad, where on the one hand, his dad seemed like the most amazing guy ever and was responsible for all of these great things about Will Smith and the success that he's had and the man he's become. But on the other hand, the dad beat the mom, and which obviously, Will Smith says was like a horrible, horrible thing to witness and to wrap his mind around. And he said that one of the main problems that he had, and I'm sure so many of us can relate to this if we have a conflicted relationship with a parent, was wrapping his mind around that split, that dichotomy. How could this guy be so wonderful and so helpful to my development in these ways, but also such a monster in this way or these ways? And that split, that kind of structural ambivalence, is at the core, the psychoanalyst would say, of almost every human being, perhaps every human being. There's also a theory that we have a self-destructive or self-sabotaging instinct because we are conflicted about life itself, right? And I talk about this in other videos, but life is very difficult even when it's going well. And the suicidal impulse is one that is very normal. Most people don't act on it, thankfully, but the suicidal impulse is very normal. In fact, the existentialist writer Albert Camus famously wrote, "Shall I kill myself today, or shall I have a cup of coffee?" In other words, meaning every morning when we get up, we have the choice to either have our morning coffee and get the day started, or we have the choice to self-destruct or commit suicide or just say, I'm through with this, right? And what he's getting at is that the suicidal impulse or the self-destructive impulse is a very common one in human beings. I hope I'm making sense here. Maybe sometime I'll do a longer video on it, but I'm trying to stick with Will Smith. So here's what I'm getting at, okay? Let me bring it back to Will Smith then. Oh, and let me say one more thing. The self-destructive instinct, the death drive, it doesn't normally express itself in an outright suicidal behavior, okay? It is very rare that people, do commit suicide or do attempt it or act on it. Well, I don't know how rare it is, but it's typically understood to be rare. And so this, it's not always that someone wants to kill themselves or tries to kill themselves. The self-destructive instinct also expresses itself in any behaviors or attitudes we have that pull us back or that stop us from progressing. And so again, you can think about this in terms of the progressive instincts versus the regressive instincts, and the fact that we are always kind of stuck in some ways in the middle. And so even something like procrastination, think about procrastination. Typically when you procrastinate, you put yourself through this, mental anguish while you're putting something off. But then what happens when you actually do that thing you were putting off? You normally find that it's not that bad. In fact, it can even be kind of enjoyable. So for oftentimes, procrastination itself, especially if someone is an habitual procrastinator, that is a kind of a regressive instinct. That is the death drive at work. It is this thing that is irrationally keeping people from progressing fully. Same thing if you think about addictions, you can think about unhealthy relationships. These can all be expressions of the death drive. And if someone grows up with parents that they have a very split view of, and I've talked about this also with the Johnny Depp situation. If you want to go and look at my video on the relationship between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, I do a psychoanalytic interpretation of it, and I talk about his relationship with his mother. But anyway, when people have a very dichotomous, as Will Smith would put it, or split relationship with the parent, it creates a kind of split in the way that they see the world in general, right? Because your world is your parent. When you are born, your world is not any bigger than you and your parent or parents. And that paradigm takes a long time to shake, especially in childhood, where the parent actually does control pretty much everything. And so if your world is one of dichotomy, is one of extremes that cannot be reconciled, that is the way that you will move forward in life, experiencing the world. That is the way that you will move forward in life in your behavior often, unless you start to realize and see the patterns. And so, here's what I'm suggesting, okay? This night, Will Smith winning an Oscar, this was going to be the apex, the peak of his life. I don't mean the peak of his life in terms of what's important to him. He will probably say that the most important day of his life was when his children were born or when he got married or who knows. But I'm saying that in terms of his legacy, in terms of what's written on his obituary, in terms of the fact that he was going to be seen that night, he was seen last night by more people, what is it, like 1 billion or something, more people in the world. I know the ratings are down, but still, more people in the world were going to see him winning an Oscar or see him giving that speech or whatever than probably had ever seen him at one time in any of his movies. His mom was at home watching. Didn't he say she was knitting with her friends? I think I saw that in an interview. His mom was at home watching. This was it. This was gonna be the moment that crowned his legacy. You could say the most important night of his life, as Denzel Washington put it, when you're at your highest point. And what I'm suggesting is not that the devil came for him. I'm suggesting that what happened is he, like a lot of people, like a lot of us, was not entirely unconsciously comfortable with pure, unadulterated success. That there was something in him that had an unconscious drive or an unconscious desire to sabotage himself on the highest point of his life and take that high point and turn it into a moment of extreme humiliation and degradation, you could say. Now, I know some people will say, well, he was right to defend her, but I'm just saying the way that it's going to be perceived, he might even have his Oscar stripped from it. And also, you know, he has, one of the things that he's been vocal about is, you know, racial equality. He and Jada, I guess Jada complained about Oscars being too white or whatever. And so, you know, it's also, to me, it's very sad that he behaved in a way that he behaved in such a way as to bring shame to himself, because you know that's like my friend Celtic Iron said, you know that there are racist people out there who will have unfortunate thoughts about that, about what happened last night as being somehow indicative of something. I mean, I was seeing it online. I was seeing these gross comments that people were making. And so what I'm trying to say to you is, like, what he did last night, the effect that it has had, whether or not some would argue that he was justified or partially justified, you know, or he was trying to defend his wife or whatever, the effect that had on last night was to degrade. He degraded himself. He potentially endangered some of the things that he's been an activist for. He embarrassed and shamed himself in front of his mother, I'm assuming, and it was in front of like 1 billion people, and he could have potentially, you know, gotten into deeper trouble than that if something had happened to Chris Rock. You know, it's just like that in New York, that elderly woman who was killed, what was it, a week or two ago? That girl shoved her maliciously and was just trying to shove her, was just being mean, was just being a bully. Well, the woman hit her head, the elderly lady hit her head, and she died. I mean, you never know, right? When you hit somebody, these things can happen. He could have been arrested, you know, if things had gone a different way. So my point is, look, getting up to hit someone at the Academy Awards, that is not just something that sort of happens, okay? That is not, you know, if Chris Rock insulted his wife, Will Smith could have gotten the point across by yelling at him, right? He could have gotten the point across in many different ways that would have gotten people on his side, right? If Will Smith had handled this, he could have still handled it aggressively or courageously or as a strong man. But if he had handled it without that abrupt public physical violence, it would have been better for him and for Jada. But he did this thing that was so outrageous, that was so unbelievable, that everybody was just like, oh my God. I'm not suggesting that it was premeditated, because I know it happened fast. What I'm suggesting is that it was, at least in part, unconsciously fueled by a desire to self-sabotage. And I think that there was something unconscious in Will Smith that was probably seeking that whole night, perhaps, to self-sabotage in some way, and it just happened to be provided the right spark by Chris Rock. So I think that's an interesting idea, and that's what I saw. I saw childhood traumas coming up, and I saw also this self-sabotage. He's at his highest point, and he unconsciously seeks to turn that into the lowest point, and that's what he did. And we all do it to some degree. Maybe not that extreme. Some of us maybe more. But it is an interesting facet of human nature. So on that happy note, I do have to say that I will, when I do my next philosophy video, I'm going to try to find something more positive, talk about some of the different theories on the meaning of life and stuff like that, since I know that my philosophy videos have, well, the last couple have been kind of negative, but true, right? Anyways, and I'll continue to do the celebrity stuff. Let me know what you want me to cover. I'm still going to do the Marilyn Manson stuff. We got the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial coming up. I'm going to be on that. And as always, subscribe to my channel, ring the bell. Please hit me up on PayPal or Patreon, the links below, if you enjoyed this. Thanks. Bye.